We're joined today by Dr. Larry Michalak from the University of California, Berkeley. He was the vice chair of the Middle East Studies department there and recently spoke at the Middle East Studies Association annual meeting in San Diego, where he presented a paper on improvements of the image of Arabs and Muslims in American cinema at a panel at Mesa. Larry is a cultural anthropologist. He was vice chair at the UC Berkeley Middle East department, as I mentioned, and his paper on the improved image of Arabs and Muslims is probably of great interest to our readers and viewers. Thank you, Larry, for joining us. And if we could just start with a summarization of the findings of your paper, which dealt with some films over the period 1999 to 2009, as I understand.
Yes, I wrote a paper which discussed 24 major Hollywood motion pictures, mainstream pictures, which had come out between 1999 and 2010. And it was by the fact that where before 1999, there had never been a full positive mainstream. And however, there have been a number of positive films about Arabs and Muslims in spite of 9/11. And my paper discussed this phenomenon. It divided these 24 major films into three categories. One was positive films, of which there were 11. One was negative films, of which there were 5. And one was neutral films, of which there were 8. And the 11 films that were positive, I think a number of them are unquestionably positive films about Arabs and Muslims. And I think it's remarkable that these films were made and that they continue to be made. The negative films actually are, for the most part, older films. They appeared toward the period that I'm discussing. There was one film in 99, 3 in 2001. In other words, they were in the pipeline before 9/11. And then there was one in 2006, which I classified as negative because of one line at the end of the movie. The neutral movies were all movies about the wars in the Middle East and the effects of these wars on American society. And I classified them as neutral because they portray the Arabs and the Muslims as innocent victims of American foreign policy, which in a way you could say is positive, but I wanted to bend over backwards not to interpret things as positive unless it was very clear. Here, I didn't interpret them as positive because the Arabs and the Muslims essentially lack agency. They are not the creators of their own destiny. But even these movies were relatively positive. So my paper was essentially about this phenomenon, and it discussed a little bit what might be some of the reasons behind it.
Can you mention the titles of perhaps a couple of the ones from each category?
Yes, let me start with the positive movies because there never has been a positive movie with a main character who was an Arab or a Muslim before 1999. Now, I should footnote this. Some people might say, well, what about The Message? What about Lion of the Desert? These were not mainstream American movies. They were funded by Libya, and they were made by an Arab American who had emigrated from Syria, a very fine fellow, Mustafa Akkad. There also was Lawrence of Arabia, but a lot of people misunderstand Lawrence of Arabia. It's actually a very negative film which presents the Arabs as being incompetent, not being able to lead themselves, requiring Lawrence of Arabia to lead them, and really not deserving independence. So until 1999, there were no positive movies that were Hollywood mainstream movies. Some examples, well, in 1999, there were 2 films that came out. The first one was called The 13th Warrior, and it was a film that starred Antonio Banderas, and it was based on a novel, a popular novel And it's about an Arab ambassador who goes to the Scandinavian area of the Volga, and he is clearly the most civilized, sophisticated person in the movie. And it was a positive movie. It wasn't a very successful movie, and it didn't get high box office ratings. But in the same year, there was a very successful movie called Three Kings, which I thought was a wonderful movie and which got very good box office and very high critic ratings. This movie, Three Kings, was a movie in which American soldiers go to uh, southern Iraq soon after the first Gulf War, and they find out about a cache of gold which Saddam Hussein has stolen from Kuwait. And they want to get this gold for themselves. In other words, they're greedy. And they go into Iraq, and they are so captivated by the villagers in a southern Iraqi village that at the end of the movie, they end up giving up the gold in order to secure the freedom of the Iraqi villagers. And it's a very positive movie. I really was impressed by it. Then came 911, and I thought to myself, that's the end of these positive movies. But it wasn't true. There were more positive movies that came out. An example is Kingdom of Heaven in 2005, which was a Ridley Scott movie where generally speaking, the Crusaders are the bad guys and the Muslims are the good guys. And it was a very positive movie. There was also Munich that same year, 2005. Munich is a movie about the Israelis want to go after the perpetrators of the Munich Olympics massacre, and they want to kill them all. So they develop a hit squad, and these people go after these bad guys and kill them one by one. But the head of the squad has second thoughts about this and decides that even though this was a terrible act that these people had done, that this operation is useless and pointless and counterproductive. And he ends up resigning from the Israeli Secret Service, taking his family, moving to New York, and at the end of the movie, he tells the Israeli Secret Service that he wants nothing more to do with them. It's a remarkable movie. Syriana is another movie which is a complicated movie, but essentially it's about how the United States essentially undermines a positive Arab ruler in the Middle East and kills him at the end of the movie. Let's see. Another one is The Kite Runner. The Kite Runner is a movie which is very positive about Islam. It's not about Arabs. It's about Afghans. But in this movie, an Afghan young man comes to the United States, and later he goes back to Afghanistan to rescue a little boy from the Taliban. And following this, they pray in a mosque, and they have beautiful music in the background, and Islam is presented as a positive religion.
Can you talk a little bit about the movie The Kingdom, since our niche is U.S. Saudi relations, that we may have some people are interested in your observation of the Kingdom. I think you described that in the Mesa panel.
Yes, The Kingdom is a movie which I consider a positive movie. It's a movie where there is a terrorist incident that takes place in an American compound in eastern Saudi Arabia. And the CIA sends a team to help the Saudis find the guilty parties that have committed this act. And the hero of the movie, or at least one of the major heroes of the movie, is a Saudi police officer. And he is very honest and fair-minded, and he helps the Americans capture the evil fundamentalists. And he dies at the end of the movie. And it's very sad, and it's presented in a way that you really have a great deal of respect for this person. Another thing that I thought was interesting is that the Saudi royal family is positively presented in the movie because the American embassy doesn't want this mission to take place. They don't want the CIA people to come. But a member of the royal family in the movie intervenes to get the American team all of the clearances that they need in order to stay there and conduct this mission. Even the fundamentalist terrorists in the movie are presented in not a positive light, but at least as human beings. The leader is an elderly man, and he's a family man. He's a beloved grandfather, and so he is not the twitching, jerking guy with a 3-day beard that we saw in all the terrorist movies of the 1980s. So I consider this a positive movie.
Can you talk a little bit about the trends that may also be existing in television? Do you have any thoughts about how movie portrayals might show a favorable image? Would you say that television is cast in a similar way?
I'm not as familiar with television because I just don't watch that much television. I know that there are scholars who have been studying television programs, and I know that they have noted that there have been laughs a lot with cinema because a lot of television programming is simply movies that are no longer current, and they get run as reruns on television. Uh, I don't know whether the television presentations would be as positive or as negative because I haven't done any research on it.
Can you talk a little bit about the image that you have detected as having improved in cinema compared to what some people think or see as a reflection in American society these days of being increasingly at odds with Arabs and Muslims, for example, the tension over mosque building and those kinds of things in recent months?
That's an excellent question, and I'm happy to answer that. I think that there is, pardon my voice, I have a cold. I think that there is a great debate which is going on in American society now about Islam and about Middle Easterners. And I think that up until recently, there's been a great deal of ignorance about the Middle East and about Islam. And especially since 9/11, there has been great attention to Middle Easterners, Middle East politics, Islam. And the result is that there is a big debate that's going on. On the one hand, you have the people who present Islam as a negative religion. And I think these people tend to be in the minority because the most prominent of them tend to be religious fundamentalists on television like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson. Uh, there are a couple of them that are fairly respectable. That would be Samuel Huntington and Bernard Lewis, who are more sophisticated in their approach. But at the same time, there is at least an equal number, probably even more, scholars of Islam who present Islam as a positive religion, who present Islam as a religion which is basically very, very similar to Judaism and Christianity. These would include people like John Esposito, Karen Anderson, John Bowl, and people like this. And when you go to a bookstore, you find lots and lots of books, and they tend to be very polarized. They either have a very positive view of Islam or a very negative view. But there's a struggle going on. However, people are learning more about Islam and about the Middle East. And I think that the more people study Islam in the Middle East, the more they are, shall we say, alleviated of their negative stereotypes, and they achieve a much more nuanced and generally positive picture of people who live in the Middle East. In other words, Arabs, Muslims, they're not, the most wonderful people in the world, and they're not the most terrible people in the world. They're fundamentally just like us, and their religion is very, very similar to Judaism and Christianity.
Well, great. Doctor, thank you so much for taking time to share the results of your research on American cinema with us. We appreciated your time and your comments, and we look forward to talking with you again. Thanks.
It's been a pleasure.